you go.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for your attendance here. This is going to be the agenda for the Committee of the Whole meeting of Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. And the opening of we acknowledge that with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, whose people for millenniums have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding Naklalaquam, Bowen Island. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. And what I would like to do is just change up the order. We're going to put the Island Trust policy because David Hawking, who is going to be a little bit late, he's got some issues that he wants to put in that one. So we're going to start with 2 Metro, and then Transport Metro, and then the Islands Trust, if that's okay with everybody. And is there anybody else that has any issues with the agenda? If not, I will approve the agenda by consent as changed. We'll move right into new business. 2.1 is external referrals, Island Trust policy statement, Metro Vancouver's Metro 2050, and the regional growth strategy, and Translink's Transport 2050. And I'm going to pass it over to Liam then at this point in time. And I must say that staff, everybody involved has done an incredible job of analyzing these referrals and bringing them to us today. So thank you for that. And over to Liam.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. So I put together a presentation and I originally, as Mayor identified, built it with the notion that we would discuss the Islands Trust, Islands 2050 referral request first, but in order to have Councillor Hawking be able to join us and weigh in on that discussion, we're going to reorder it and talk about the Metro 2050 and the Transport 2050 first. So let me share my screen with you. Now, you may have to bear with me. I'm not as technologically savvy as our planner and others when it comes to doing these Zoom shares. You have that screen?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. Now, I know if I press this presenter view, that's where things often go awry for me.
Looks good. Fine.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What I still see you. What has happened to me in the past is I lose all of you, and so this is good. This is working then. So basically, what we're here to talk about today is these external referrals, and the purpose, as you know, of a committee of the whole is to be able to have a little more in-depth discussion with the freedom of not having to make a decision at the end of the meeting. And so we want to share with you staff's assessment of these long-range plans and how we believe they relate to Bowen Island. And it gives an opportunity for this frank discussion for you also to point out things, concerns or things that you like or that you've noticed in your review of these long-range plans. So this is the presentation content that we want to share with you today. So we've got a bit of a timeline that we want to touch base on. And as I mentioned, we're going to rejig the order. So we're going to start with Metro 2050, then Transport 2050, and then come back to the Islands Trust. The bulk of the discussion, I believe, will be around the Islands Trust. And then at the end, we'll talk about next steps and where do we go from here. And basically what we're looking at is the next 30 years of long-range planning for the region. And So all three of these long-range plans have significant impacts on Bowen Island. And so it's important for us to make sure we're fully aware of what they contain and what those potential impacts are, and take the opportunity to provide feedback. And when we get to the next steps, it'll also be clear that this isn't our only opportunity for feedback. This is really our first opportunity. So if we find that we missed something or new information comes to light, this isn't our only chance. So keep that in mind. And as we go through the presentation, I think it is valuable to be able to capture people's thoughts in the moment. And so I'm not concerned about needing to get through the entire presentation and then field questions, but we do need to keep track of time. So I think we should go along and field questions as we go. And if we feel like we're running short on time, we may ask people to hold their questions so we can get through the presentation. So the referral response timeline for all three of these are basically very similar timeframes. And so what we propose to be doing is bringing back the formal council response to the referral request at the November 22nd regular council meeting. The Islands Trust was hoping to get a response sooner than that to support some of their discussions that they'll be having at the executive table. But they also recognize that we built this timeline before knowing about their desire to have the comments back in advance. And so they're okay with us submitting our response later, and that'll be still built into their work going forward. And when we get into the Islands Trust a little more detail, we'll also recognize that their whole timeline has been expanded. And so there isn't an urgency to get this response in immediately. So I think the November 2nd date still works. And if there's concerns about that, we could potentially adjust accordingly. And Metro Vancouver was seeking their response by the 26th of November. So we would be within their time frame. And Translink is really their referral process is a bit different, and that most of their feedback is being done via online surveys. But there's still an opportunity for us to provide a direct response. Any questions about the referral timeline and things like that before we move into it? Okay. So bear with me here. I'm going to end the slideshow to get us to skip past the Islands Trust piece. As you can see, there's many slides on the trust piece, and jump into the Metro Vancouver section. Oh, that didn't work. Okay.
Yeah, it did.
Oh.
No.
No, we're back at slide 1.
Well, I'm not sure. Did you actually open up the other slide? Oh, you may just have to scroll right through.
I think I'm just going to go quickly this way. You get sneak peek of all this.
There we go.
And actually everything that's on these slides is in the staff report, so there's not really any net new information. The one difference that in this presentation that isn't in the staff report is for each item that staff have identified as something for us to be concerned about, I've written a brief recommendation. And so I've done that for the Metro Vancouver, the Translink, and the Islands Trust. And one approach can be that if the committee as a whole agrees, we can bundle up all of those recommendations into one large recommendation to council to consider at the regular meeting. And certainly we can add to those recommendations, edit them, delete them, whatever you might see fit. But to try to help and, with how do we actually respond to all three of these things, I thought it would be best that we actually had some language that looked like more of a formal recommendation. So yes.
So with the Metro 2051, we had the meeting with them last week, and good discussion. Does Sophie have all the comments recorded and suggestions we were making? Because there was a number of things that came out of that meeting.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But I'm not sure we're actually covered in the staff report.
There were comments noted in the minutes, but not super detailed.
Okay, so you did sort of capture the essence of what we were suggesting in the minutes.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, haven't had a chance to look. Sorry about that.
It's a really good question, Councillor Morris. I think we should, to the best of our ability, try to reiterate some of those here today to make sure we're capturing them. Because you're correct that they're not all captured in the staff report. So if we can try to reiterate those. And then additionally, we'll get another chance at the regular meeting, the regular council meeting, to make additions or amendments as necessary if we've overseen something here today. So for each of these long range plans, we'll have an introductory slide like this. It just talks about what we'll be looking at. And so the context of what the Metro 2050 plan is, the approval process, overarching comments from staff, and any specific items. I think because we just did have that great presentation from Metro staff last week, we probably don't need to spend too much time on this next slide on context, because I think we all get it and we all understand. So while we're a member of Metro Vancouver, Bowen Island Municipality is not held to the regional growth strategy because we actually fall under the provisions of the Islands Trust Act for regional context and long-term planning oversight. So our review and input into the plan is not mandatory, but it's welcome. And I think what I heard pretty clearly from all of council is that we as a municipality do want our voices to be heard and to be part of that kind of process. And so it's important for us to take the opportunity to review it and provide feedback. And so the approval process is fairly straightforward for the Metro 2050 plan. They're wrapping up their comment period by the end of November. And then in December, they'll be reassessing the entire process and considering any adjustments they might need to make. And then they're looking for a first bylaw reading in January or February of 2022, and moving to a public hearing after that in February, March. And then following that through April to June of 2022, they'll be seeking signatory acceptance. Again, we're not a signatory, but I think we'll continue to try to be part of the process and have our voices heard. And they'll be seeking final bylaw adoption in July 2022. The 2050 goals for Metro 2050 goals are broken down into these 5 goals: create a compact urban area, support a sustainable economy, and protect the environment and respond to climate change and natural hazards, provide diverse and affordable housing choices, and support sustainable transportation choices. It's interesting that we can see ourselves in much of that, but the first one in particular may not resonate for Bowen, you know, because we're not an urban community. But we certainly are starting to think about the need for densification, or making, you know, thinking about like where we have any kind of compact, complete village core type planning. Yes, Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. This is in regards to that first point, the create a compact urban area. In much of the material that comes forth from Metro, there is that very strong urban emphasis, which makes sense. That's where most of the people are. And that's where most of the expenditures are for infrastructure. But there is very, very little attention paid to the planning issues that are faced by rural areas. And I'm not just talking about Bowen Island, I'm talking about some of the municipalities that are sort of on the fringes, or that have a mix of you know, a significant mix of rural and urban. And I would like, if it were possible, for somewhere in Metro Vancouver, for rural issues to be highlighted more than they currently are. So for example, one of the things that came up in our housing related discussions is that when you move from 1 to 2 households on a well, you suddenly have a requirement for a water system. I would imagine that that is a challenge in many of the rural areas of Metro Vancouver, and perhaps that's something Metro Vancouver might want to say something about, especially given their renewed focus on diverse and affordable housing choices. So just in general, there's a strong emphasis on urban. It's understandable there's a strong emphasis on urban, but a good chunk of Metro is still rural and needs a bit more attention than it's getting.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Kale, I think, had
Next,
hand
yeah.
up next.
Yeah, Liam, very simply, and I think you're going to hear this comment throughout this and through the Islands Trust. I wouldn't mind a bit of a glossary of terms which actually tells me what is meant by a compact urban area. I would certainly have my interpretation of what a compact urban area, but this is a serious document. A lot of professional people involved. I would appreciate if someone would tell me, in this context, what is the definition of a compact urban area? Not for now, but I think the need for these glossary of terms will come up through the piece. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kale. And Councillor Morris?
Well, there is a glossary of terms, but that isn't one that's defined. But I was having a chat yesterday with the planner for the Transport 2050, and they talk about compact urban area, but 2040 used to have a discussion of rural, and it got replaced by the recreational, green space, agriculture, those kinds of things, because those areas are shown on the map. So I agree with Maureen that they need to have more reference to rural, but it seems to have been a conscious change in definitions of looking at going back to putting in recognizing recreational, agriculture, and those kinds of things. And those are sort of where we would get picked up, which in the old days was called rural areas.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor Morris. Councillor Fast.
Thank you. And thanks for the overview. I want to follow up on the Maureen's comment about the rural. I agree with this. I did look into the plan. I don't have it up in front of me, the draft Metro 50, but there was a map that was labeled rural. And interestingly, on that Boyer Island, which is also in the Islands Trust, was colored in green as rural, but Bowen was not. And you know, the urban containment boundary is a wonderful thing, and it's what separates, partly what separates Bowen from the mainland over there running through West Van. But I agree, there needs to be more of a focus on the other side, the rural side. And I notice in, I believe it's, well, Metro Translink 2050. Anyway, the transportation one, it had a wonderful map that showed, and also in this document, the Metro 2050, it had a map of Bowen, it had the major cycling network chunk on Bowen coming into the cove, and then a greenway going across. And one of the reasons for these was access to nature. And that's something that I think needs to be more recognized in the rural planning. How do you plan for the rural parts of a sustainable region? And access to nature is interestingly visible there in the greenways part, but not very much elsewhere in the document. And yet we're learning from COVID, I think, and the increase in visitation of regional parks, for example. The data is showing that people need it for health, and there's more and more reports. So that's one comment I would make, is that access to nature be considered in the rural, and that the rural be bumped up. And then I did a more of a dive into the document after our committee of the whole there last week, and I have a recommendation that because it seems like there's so much overlap between Islands Trust, preserve and protect ecosystems, unique island character, rural, and Metro 2050 document in terms of goals. And I was going to suggest that we recommend Metro 2050 that they add a strategy under number 3 there, protect the environment and respond to climate change and natural hazards, that we add a strategy. Metro Vancouver will work with the Islands Trust to protect ecosystems on Bowen Island. And the reason for this is that I looked for the word collaboration, comes up 17 times. And the one right in front of 3.2 I guess it would be 3.2.4 is the one about Agricultural Land Commission, which is another long-range land use planning body outside of Metro Vancouver's jurisdiction. But it's also, it does show up on Bowen's map. On one of the Bowen maps for agriculture shows the ALR parcels on Bowen. So I was going to propose, if we want Bowen to show up as a possibility for environment and conservation and recreation, that we ask them to add a goal. Metro Vancouver will work with the Islands Trust to protect ecosystems in Bowen Island, and whatever else we might want to say about recreation, provide access to nature, for example, and that corresponding protected areas be included on the respective maps. Because that's how they do it with ALR. There's a goal, there's that strategy under the goal, and then they show it on the map. And I thought, if ALR lands can be shown on Bowen, why couldn't nature reserves, Crippen Park, some of these other things? And then it's collaboration, overlapping goals. We can accomplish so much more together. And then second recommendation I was going to make is that council direct staff to recommend to the draft 2050 regional growth strategy that they refer it to the Islands Trust formally. Islands Trust did reach out to them very early on in the process, partly to find out about their process, but partly to say, hi, hello, here we are. Let's talk, share information. But even though Islands Trust is part of the regional district area, they haven't received it as a formal referral. And that would give them a chance to talk about these overlapping goals and how they might work together. And to that, so that's my suggestion.
Right. I think on your second recommendation there, I think you're right. My sense is that the Islands Trust sent their policy statement or the Islands 2050 document to Metro as a formal referral, but it didn't happen the other way around. So they ended up talking to each other about their respective plans, but Metro, I don't think, asked the Islands Trust for a formal response. So yeah.
Anyway, those would be my two contributions there. And I think what that would do was take Bowen on the maps from being blank whiteness to being speckled with green and colors that related to the parks, nature reserves, and ecological reserve, and the other kinds of environmental ecological protection, and maybe access to nature or other kinds of rural goals, whatever else they might flesh out. I thought this would be a good place to start for them to work together. So that's my input.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Morris, you still have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm guessing that Boyer might be covered in the map just because it's an electoral area. It's part of electoral area A. But the other is, we raised the question about Bowen being white at the council meeting, and we need to have a written request that the color for Bowen Island be on the regional land use designation map, for example, be a different color. And I would be quite happy to have it, you know, some color that's not the same as the First Nations lands. But and also to have the designations showing the, you know, recreational or the agricultural, and, you know, the island may be labeled rural, and then the conservation and recreation color for Crippen Park and some of those things.
Right.
But I think we definitely need a written request that, you know, on map 2, that we have a category called Islands Trust color, and that could pick up Boyer as well. But the other interesting thing with Boyer is because it's not the Islands Trust does planning for Boyer, so yeah.
I beg your pardon?
The Islands Trust, the Boyer falls under the Islands Trust, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Passage.
So, and Passage, yeah. So Passage doesn't even show up on this map.
Oh, there's too little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morris. Mayor Ander.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One, I think it was quite clear during that Zoom meeting with the Metro folks that we weren't exactly happy the way the Bowen Island was presented on the maps and that sort of thing, and we seem to get neglected only because, and there's more rural places than certainly Bowen Island are, but because of how small we are and that sort of thing in the population, but also the fact that we are under the Islands Trust. I think this is a Metro plan. I don't think a collaboration with, I think they should definitely refer it to the trust, but I think a collaboration with the trust, I don't know if that's going to work out or not. I don't think it's part of their mandate, but I think they should definitely refer it to the trust. That would be my comment there.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. And so just moving to the last slide for Metro, we had added in a draft recommendation that BIM staff recommend reinforcing the need for Bowen Island to
You're missing a word.
should say to be identified in this in this way, referring to the top, so as being part of the region, rather than being identified as not applicable. So I think that message was loud and clear when Metro staff were here last week. I think we should formalize that, and I think that the other recommendations from Councillor Fast also make sense. You know, so I think that we can, it might be good process-wise for council to, or committee of the whole to weigh in on this at this point in time, rather than waiting to the end of the meeting to finalize, well, what would the recommendation from the committee of the whole be to council, and then staff can write that up for the regular council meeting.
Okay, thanks. Hey, Maureen.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, the cat has joined us. 2 points. One is that at the Council of Councils, during the presentation on housing that Heather McNell gave, there was an insistent councillor from, I think, Coquitlam, Jamie McAvoy, and who talked about Metro putting itself forward as being sort of proud of not having a tax requisition in support of the housing needs in the region. And his point was that it's, you know, fundamental infrastructure, and really perhaps Metro should be giving more thought to the funding that is provided for housing over and above the money that's being made available through the end of the mortgages from, you know, 30 odd years ago, when many of the housing corporation complexes were built. So that's just one thing. It's there may be something more that needs to be said in this document about housing is funded and how Metro Vancouver views its commitment to funding housing. And then the second point is that we focused a lot of our discussion on Metro Vancouver from the perspective of Bowen Island. And I think it's really important in terms of the way our recommendations are perceived, that they not be perceived as sort of parochial and coming from a really, you know, narrow perspective, that we actually understand this document and we understand the implications of what is being proposed, and that we support in general what is being proposed, or we don't. I think we need an anchoring statement at the beginning of our feedback to Metro that says something in general about, we know what this is, we like it, we don't like it. Otherwise, we're going to end up being the folks on the edge who fall off the map and sometimes don't get colored. You know, and I mean, that's not going to play well.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. I think Councillor Morris had her hand up.
I think I forgot to lower it, but I totally
Okay.
agree with, we need to say, provide some comments on the total plan and
Positivity.
say that we're
Yeah.
generally in favor of, you know, what they're proposing.
Yeah, I agreed. And Councillor Fast?
Yeah, similar. I just think some kind of general endorsement, and here's some suggestions to strengthen the document would be great. 30 years is what we're looking at here. And that's 2050 is the same kind of timeline that they're looking at the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow at the moment, to do with the climate crisis and which we've acknowledged as an emergency, and the biodiversity crisis facing the planet. And so I think maybe that, anyway, I would just thought that it's very timely to be talking about these things, and that's a very good reason for supporting Metro 2050 and Islands 2050 and all of these plans, because time is short for the future of the planet and a livable future for grandkids and all those things. And maybe there's some words in there that you might want to include. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Faston. I agree very much so with Councillor Nicholson's comments, and I think that we would be well served to share our support for the overall plan, not just to point out the shortcomings of being white on the map. And so I would recommend that staff support the Metro 2050 strategy, and that
Staff support or council support?
Well, I'm just saying that I can't speak on behalf of council, but
He's just telling us.
Yeah. I'm letting you know that from a staff perspective, we're fine with it, and that if council wanted to, I would recommend that council in the referral response have some statement saying that council supports the regional growth strategy, and then identifies these areas that we would like to be addressed. And I think Councillor Nicholson also did raise and I heard from other councillors too, that it's not just rural Bowen, it's rural Metro that needs to be highlighted here. So
yeah.
Well, there is a rural map, but it doesn't include a lot of things in it.
Right. Yeah.
Because one would have thought the agricultural would have been rural too, but
yeah.
So,
I think that what we can commit to doing is consolidating these comments and bringing forward to the regular council meeting a recommendation that captures what was said here today.
okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on, we would now move to the Translink long-range plan, which is Transport 2050. And we didn't have an express meeting from them to council, but there were various workshops and opportunities to fill out surveys to provide feedback. So taking a similar approach, the context of the Transport 2050 is that Translink is really looking to identify the critical transportation needs in the region for the next 30 years. And they've come up with 5 guiding goals that they're using to advance the plan, making sure that all transportation approaches are convenient, reliable, affordable, safe and comfortable, and carbon-free. And so there is a real heavy emphasis on mass transportation, on looking at mass transit, and really trying to focus on how do we improve those transit corridors for more efficient and effective transportation of people and goods in the region. So the timeline that they're working on is similar. Phase 1 was really in 2019 when they were trying to learn about what needs there are in the region and listen to feedback from communities. In the spring of 2021 was when they really started to develop their goals and action plans. And in this fall of 2021 is when the review of the draft strategy was being conducted. And they're looking for approvals early 2022. And really what they'll need to do is to get all of the mayors and the mayor's council to sign off on the plan. Overarching and specific comments about the plan that staff identified is that the draft strategy, while really great at identifying urban needs, I personally think it falls short on identifying rural needs, and it certainly seems to fall short on identifying any of Bowen's needs. There's very little discussion about improved transit services to and from the island, and most certainly nothing really about on the island. There's no real discussion about improvements to transportation for the Horseshoe Bay Marine Terminal. You know, and the term rural, I did a search on the document, it's only used 3 times. And those 3 times it's actually used in definitions of urban containment. So it's pretty weak, if not, you know, not represented at all. So staff's recommendation is that we would expect to see greater recognition and attention to the needs of islanders, especially since new development on the island are now subject to the Translink development cost charge. So we're contributing to Translink's financial well-being, but we're not necessarily receiving the benefits. Certainly, it is fantastic that we have transit on the island, but we all know that it could be much better. And so we think that there needs to be a much greater emphasis on the rural aspect of things. So I'll open it up for discussion, and I'm not sure who had their hand up first. We'll start with Councillor Fast.
Sure, thank you. And I appreciate your comment about needs of islanders. I also, similar to my previous comments, I think we need to think about the needs of Lower Mainland residents in general, in terms of the getaway place, and in terms of the increased numbers of visitors we've been seeing. Not necessarily that we want them to come in cars, but that we want them to have more access to nature and have more ways to get around that are low carbon as per one of their goals. And that could mean obviously the bicycling and the electric bikes. With the session I was in, I asked them, does this include electric bikes? And they said they thought it was going to be a game changer. And so I think because hills are not an obstacle for somebody with an electric bike, we might see more of that. As well, we might see more people walking off the ferry from transit, walking around on the island and wanting to catch a bus back to the ferry. That's already happening. That was happening 10 years ago with people waiting for the bus down the end of West Side or Laura Road over there on the other side of the island. You walked across. And so I think it's not just island residents, you know, going to the bigger theme of the role we play in the Lower Mainland. We're one of the few getaway places that still is rural. If you think about White Rock or some of those other ones that are have lost some of their cottagey characteristics or their natural paths and trails, and I think we could play a more significant role, as could the rest of the rural areas. Again, I agree with you that rural areas are not just blank places waiting for sprawl. They need to have, they have a role also in carbon capture and in clean air and providing water and stabilizing slopes and all that to do with stormwater in an increasingly stormy and longer, drier summers and all those kinds of things. So I think they could help, rural areas are going to help stabilize, like keep the region livable through beginnings of climate change and help us stay below. So it's not, I don't know, it's not, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's not just blank land waiting to become urban land. It's got a role in a livable region and it's not defined. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Kale?
Liam, I wonder if we could begin this rather as we did the last one. The first thing that they've presented is the 5 goals. And if we're in agreement with that, and I frankly can't see, perhaps we should state as an opening comment that yes, we're in agreement with the 5 goals, and we actually state that if that's the will of council here, that we support the 5 goals. Then if we go to the second paragraph, the one that starts, the strategy is focused primarily on urban centres, and the term rural only used 3 times. That certainly is something that we could say that rather and to piggyback on the third sentence, not BIM expects, but where we talk about greater recognition and attention. So if you like, the strategy focusing on urban centres is one of the main reasons why we're requesting greater recognition and attention. I don't like the term the draft strategy fails to specify, because I'm not sure whether they're actually at the point where they're specifying anything. I may be wrong, Liam, but I thought this was more a broad initial document. And would it not be true that we look forward to hearing more specifically, or more specifically in regards to the needs of communities such as ours, et cetera, trying to turn the emphasis around that. Yes, we agree with the broad in a positive way, as we did before. We agree with the goals, and then say, you know, and our issue on the term rural, and then leading to a need for greater recognition, and then leading to improved services. What I'm just trying to do is turning it around, moving from the bigger picture, we agree, and then saying what it is that we would like to be reviewed as they go through this process, and our feedback would be along those lines.
Thank you, Councillor Kale, and I agree. I wouldn't want to use the term fails in our actual response. That's a very good point. And what I was trying to get at with that point is that there's no discussion at all about ferries. There's very minimal discussion about water transportation, but it seems to me they're focused on the sea bus and that type of water transportation. And it seems to me like they've missed the opportunity to represent Bowen Island and any other water-based transportation needs in the region other than the sea bus type. So I do like what your approach though, Councillor Kale.
Yeah, and we belabored that point, I think, at our meeting. So hopefully in follow up to the meeting, we talked about water transportation and the effect that our demands on, this is an excellent point about the being talk about a terminal, not just a terminal, but a transit hub. That I think is an excellent expression, and one we could amplify, because I think it says more. It says more than you know, that's an excellent sentence, and I think it's really would not suffer from some amplification.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Kale. Councillor Morris?
So a few things. I think one of the big things is the, you know, showing the green spaces and transport to them. I'm trying to find the different sections, but there's a whole emphasis on active transportation and bike lanes and all that kind of stuff. And that is a tremendous benefit to us because it helps us get the funding to build bike lanes and that sort of thing. Also, if we need to put in something under 1.2.5 sub F, they use the word urban centers because they were copying Metro Vancouver's document and wanting to have similar language. But the marine transportation is not just the sea bus. What they're meaning in that is connecting various areas so you can, like we heard at our session about the travel up the river. And so what we need to do is put something in our submission that it's not urban centers, but local
Community-
centers or villages or village areas or something that
Community hubs. something.
community hub, something that would include, I mean, we could be as specific and say, for example, Snug Cove, because they weren't trying to leave us out.
Right, okay, and that's what when I read that section that you referenced, 1.2.5.f, that to me read very much as like an urban context of sea buses and the like.
Yeah, no, the sea bus would fit more into a rapid transit corridor. So this is more expanding. So we need to say that. And then the other is the whole express inter-regional corridors. I think we need to say that we would hope those inter-regional corridors will service the Horseshoe Bay Transit Hub, because you can walk off the ferry, get on a bus that'll take you up to Whistler or up to Squamish, and that sort of thing. The 257 takes us, to downtown, but it doesn't necessarily. In the North Shore Regional Transportation Plan, there was conversation about a express bus along the highway that would get you to Phibbs and get you through to SFU. Sorry about the noise in the background. He knows I'm on the phone. Let me jump on the floor for a minute. No, let me stop. So we need to, to specify clearly we want Horseshoe Bay to be a transit hub, accessible through the new regional transportation system. And that also we can say will take some of the congestion off the road. I mean, so there's a plus for us with that interregional system because it'll take some of the congestion off the traffic. So that's another plus, I think, with that. And then if you go and look at 1.2.6, it says fill gaps in fixed route transit network by providing on-demand microtransit service. So there is still plans to go ahead with looking at that whole pilot. COVID got in the way. So it's a more high level document than getting into specific routes. And if they do improve rapid transit corridors down Georgia Street, that's going to be a big boon to us for people that ride our little express bus or ride the 257 or the 250. And, because it'll help, it gets rid of the delays and the buses can run on time. So there are things in there that are of benefit. I'm trying to read my notes and you all know how difficult that is. Now, somebody said figures 12 and 13 do not include Bowen. And I was curious about what was meant by that in the report. Because Bowen Island is on the map as an island, but its frequent transit corridors are rapid transit development. So like SkyTrain and Rapid Bus.
Do you see your shared screen changing to a different image now?
Yeah.
So this is figure 12, which is.
So why are you saying Bowen isn't on the map? We're up there.
I didn't say that. I don't know. But it's not on this map.
Some maps in the plan do not include Bowen at all, figures 12 and 13.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that's my bad. Yeah, my apologies. I did not note that it is captured in that little inset.
Yeah, now I've had the discussions with them that the inset needs to be over on the side, but it's really, if Lions Bay isn't there either, because we're not a major transit growth corridor. And that's what they're showing is where they think all the housing and the population is going to end up going. and
Yep.
that's going to have to be addressed. And then the previous map is more things like where SkyTrain would go, dedicated bus lanes and things like that.
Right.
So neither of them are really, you notice Amor and Belterra and
Yeah.
most of the northern side aren't there either. Out in,
Okay.
Whitlam. So
Yeah.
I think we can maybe remove that comment.
Yeah, that wouldn't be part of the response.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
No.
And then, so I see the transit hub for Horseshoe Bay as a comment we should make. I
Yes.
think with the on-demand, they're looking at improved transit system on the island and improved access to and from the island. If that picks up the ferry, water taxi, passenger ferry to the Seabus terminals, which gets rid of the vagaries of the bridges, then, I think a little more specificity in those comments would be good. And the rural definition is, again, they went back to using the designations that Metro was using for Metro 2050. So that's sort of why that's, they didn't use the word rural very much. And then the other thing I think we might want to put in there, and I can't find the section, is they've got the map of the recreation areas is in the plan now. And I think we would like to make a reference. Yeah, so they've identified those, but how to get to them all is still in the planning stages and would be, they've identified them as regionally significant areas that they need to think about for transit. So I think we need to put a little comment in there that we would hope that Cypress Park in particular would be able to be serviced from the regional transportation hub of Horseshoe Bay.
Cypress Park?
Cypress Park, yes. So skiing and hiking.
Right. So you can actually take transit to the mountain instead of
Yes,
driving.
exactly.
Yeah.
The mountain has a bus, don't they?
The mountain has a bus that goes from Park Royal.
Oh, Park Royal, that's right, correct, yeah.
Yeah. But, for Lions Bay to be able to take the community shuttle into Horseshoe Bay, and for Caulfield to be able to take the community shuttle into Horseshoe Bay, and then get up and us to take the ferry across, and then get on a bus that would on the weekends service Cypress Park, Cypress Bowl.
It might also be helpful for them to indicate on this map which areas are protected and not open to the public. They've got the ecological reserve here as a park. And there are other areas that are.
Well, we do have a park, so maybe we should question the mapping, because we've got Apodaca Park.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
So
that,
they may have thought that was
But
Apodaca.
my point is more to protect it. You're not going to want to be enabling public transit to a protected.
No, but I'm not, I don't know if there's any of the other areas that are necessarily protected, but so a general comment would be Bowen Island has a provincial park, which is Apodaca Park. But we also have an ecological reserve, and we're not sure that you have got both on the map, and only they need to be differentiated. Yeah.
ecological reserves not open to the public, and
Yeah.
Apodaca is water access only.
Well, you
Yeah.
can hike into it.
If you get permission from the landowners or the warden to go through the ecological reserve.
Well, one of these days you'll be able to. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think those were my. And I mean, I think we should be very specific with the water transportation that we would like to see an electric passenger ferry from Snug Cove to the Seabus terminal. Might not matter which Seabus terminal, but preferably the downtown one.
Rather see it out of Seymour Bay. But either or would be good, I guess.
Well, there's probably more
Allison?
chance. There's a dock in Snug Cove.
Are you finished, Allison?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple of questions. What is that? What do they call it? The heat thing there?
Heat dome?
Oh, the heat dome.
Yeah, the heat
whatever.
dome. What's that all about? Very
That was
quick.
that heat wave this summer.
Oh, that's what they were talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we have to concentrate on the needs of Bowen Island. I think mentioning the marine, some kind of marine passenger only transit would be amazing. Our transit on the island is woefully I mean, it's okay, but it's really tokenism. And I don't know what
Well,
you're hearing about
Gary,
what.
One other thing I forgot to mention, and I haven't actually gone through, but I quickly asked we are 3 from the bottom in the number of boardings on 200 routes. And
Yeah, that's fine. I
one of our
understand that.
routes,
I
and
understand that.
yeah, so it's, I mean,
That doesn't mean they ignore us though.
well, no, but they haven't ignored us. We've got a bus, and I think the active transportation bid is probably, you know, we may be benefiting.
Fine. They're giving us a lot of money on the side. What are you hearing about an on-demand bus? I haven't heard.
Well, that's what I just said. It's in the plan. So they will be working on that, but everything got shelved because of COVID.
Well, okay.
And the on-demand bus could also help out with something like Handy Door.
Okay, well, that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
I agree with Michael. You know, I think it's a good plan, but one thing on Bowen is it's certainly not convenient. I understand the logistics of it. I understand that it has to be heavily subsidized. There's no question about that. But, you know, to the point about the, you know, where they're getting their money from the house building and stuff, the DCCs, I mean, that's a huge deal. Somebody just told me the other day they had to cut a check for $4,200 or something on their house just as a DCC for Translink.
So the DCC rates are the same for a single family residential house, no matter where you live in the region.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just saying it's a lot of money.
I was curious.
It's a lot more money they've got that they didn't have.
How much have we paid in DCC?
Councillor Morris,
Right.
could I ask you to stop interrupting and let Mayor Ander finish his
Okay, I was just
point?
trying to correct misinformation.
Well, I don't think there was a correction needed. I think the statement stands on its own.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Liam. All I'm saying is that there's a new stream of income for them, so they should be putting that back onto the island. And the faster they can do that, the better. If they want to get us out of our cars and that sort of thing, which I would love to do, but you know, unless we have convenient transport, it's not going to happen. Those would be my only comments, and that's all sort of integral Bowen Island stuff. Of course, we would like a water taxi or a water passenger only ferry, but I can't see that. I can't see that in the near future. They don't seem to be onto that at all. I don't think there's much, you know, what we're saying there is a bare minimum. Horseshoe Bay is a transit hub, improved transit service on the island, guaranteed, and improved access to and from the island, which is passenger ferry. What more can you say? I don't think we're going to get much out of it anyway.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Ander.
Yeah.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. Liam, could you scroll that to page 33 in the document? Because I just want to make sure I'm understanding something.
Is this page 33? It's page 20. This one is page 27 of the PDF, but page.
It's page 33 of the PDF of the document.
Okay, so is this the correct one?
Local fixed. I think it's page.
Or
one more.
This one here?
Yeah, keep scrolling. Okay, stop. So this is what's confusing me given the conversation here. Point 1, point 2, point 3D says consider additional passenger ferry services to connect locations where water-based transit, etc. Everybody notice that?
Yeah.
Is this the spot? Well, one, we could in our feedback express strong support for that statement. And we also could suggest the inclusion of a couple of examples. So for example, from Bowen Island, for example, from wherever, Queensborough and in New Westminster or Ioko or wherever, but Bowen for sure included there. And then the next point is a map point, and it's on page 38, Liam. Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so if you look at this map, Bowen is urban.
Oh, right. Look at that.
Oh, I missed that one.
Yeah.
And we're also,
Good
I'm
catch.
looking at a previous version.
yeah, and we're also, it's really unclear what they're talking about when they're talking about interregional transit connections.
Yeah.
Are we an interregional transit connection? Like what are they talking about here?
They're talking about the Sea to Sky corridor and out the Fraser Valley. So those are the two areas where tons of traffic feeds into, and people feed into the Lower Mainland.
So the icon they're using, what is the meaning of the icon?
The icon, those are ferry. Those are ferries. Yeah. So that's, and the ferry terminals down in the other one, Vancouver Island. So that is the other, the ferry is an interregional connection because they come in from Nanaimo and they come in from the island and they come in from Seychelles.
If I can just, this was what I was going to speak to too. So thank you very much, Maureen, for bringing it up. There's also, they put in the airports here as well.
Yeah.
And, but in terms of the ferry terminals, I think a point I made in the session that I was in about Metro 2050 was that not only, as someone probably, Councillor Morris has mentioned, does it keep more cars off the road if you have better transit hubs where they have currently listed ferry terminals, but it also keeps the traffic jams off the highway and the bridges, which are big, you know, those groups of cars all traveling together off the ferry cause trouble because they're not flowing as smoothly as the rest of the traffic. And good catch about the Bowen being urban on this map, but I was going to point out the long interregional highway that goes all the way up to Pemberton, which is great. Why don't they have dotted pink lines going out from the, let's call them waterfront transit hubs, over to the, because those are also interregional, right?
So show the ferry
routes. Show the ferry routes, yeah.
That was the question I had.
And then I think that would be help to make the point that people are already traveling these ways interregionally and that we should plan for them in the long term. And then I had a couple more points moving on to page 44, but if I think this is a really important map because more and more people are traveling interregionally. And I think it's important for Transport 2050 to consider all that traffic moving back and forth through the region, sometimes transiting right through, and that they need to plan for that. So I'm seeing David joining us with his hand up. We're just talking about the ferry terminals becoming transit hubs and that kind of thing, catching up on probably some of your ideas, but I'll shut up now, except I did want to go to page 44 when we're ready, the access to nature part. Thank you.
Great. I just want to,
that one.
Sorry, I just want to come back to Councillor Nicholson to make sure that she was finished with her comments.
Yes, I am.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
great. Thank you, Councillor Fast. And Councillor Hawking, welcome.
Thank you, and I apologize. Sorry for arriving late. I just had another meeting that I had to do. My thoughts are just basically exactly on the points that were just raised. The Sue Ellen's points about the interregional is really important, and I found that seemed to be lacking in a lot of they were talking a lot about the internal movements and not really reflecting that it's this interregional stuff that adds a whole lot of traffic going across the bridges in narrow, causing congestion in various places, as well as obviously emissions. So I think that idea was really important of showing the ferry routes. But I just wanted one more piece on what Maureen was saying on page 32. I think the wording is not quite right as what they say. So if we can go back to, it was at page 33 on the foot passenger service. So that was 33 on the document itself.
It's this here, 1.2.3 sub D.
Yeah. So see what it says, consider additional passenger ferry services to connect locations where water-based transit offers greater accessibility, blah, 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 and reliability compared to land-based transit. Well, there's no land-based alternative to get to Bowen Island. I mean, what this suggests is foot passenger service to go directly downtown. It's actually also important to have another idea, and a much simpler one and much cheaper one. And it's really hard to do efficient foot passenger service to go downtown. Boats use a lot of fuel, a lot of power. They're dangerous in the winter and so on. They bang into logs, all kinds of bad things happen. It's pretty simple to go across to Horseshoe Bay if you're connected with really fast transit. And in the meeting that I was there, they did talk about that, where you could have, for instance, an automated bus service on a separate guideway, maybe as part of the roads that currently exist, that get you straight downtown from big interregional traffic sources like a ferry terminal. So it's that one point compared to land-based. It's more than that. It's not just compared to land-based.
How about if it said including compared to land-based?
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's part of it, obviously, and that there's a lot of that they're thinking in other areas as well.
It just makes it broader.
Yeah. And just one other point. When I joined, I heard, I think Allison mentioning it, or maybe no, Gary was in the one that I did with them when I was having the conversation. They did raise the on-demand service that we had on Bowen, and that they were doing more work on that, and that was one of the ways that they would try to use to figure out how to help low density areas like Bowen. So in other words, that seems to be in their thinking. I heard it as well. So just wanted to
thank you.
Comment. Okay, thanks. That's it from me for now.
Okay.
Okay, I think Councillor Fast is next.
Thank you. I'll be quick. It follows on some of the earlier comments I made in the Metro 2050. So if you move ahead to page 44 in the draft, this is the big call out box, access to nature. And it relates to figure 6 below it. But I think this is really something that speaks to why Bowen should be on that other regional context map. And the, oops, I'm scrolling madly here. Shoot, what page? 44, right. And then the map that follows it, Liam, you had it up a minute ago.
The park, this map?
Yeah, and my question is, that's the figure that goes along with access to nature. And my question for them would be, can you make this access to nature map better match the maps in Metro 2050? Because this is, for one thing, this is also called urban. Bowen is called urban here, I noticed, by the way. And so that should be corrected.
So just to make sure I'm clear, so you're thinking that this map needs to be better aligned with the Metro, which
2050 regional context statement map, that big figure 2, and the rural map, and the conservation, whatever.
Conservation and recreational lands and greenway lands.
Yeah, but that's what it was in the old one. I don't know if those are on the new one. I've lost my track looking at too many plans. But I do think that these maps you should be able to look at one and go, oh, that's the one I saw over there. Thank you. Right,
they should. Okay, got it. Thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Nicholson.
I'm unmuted. Sorry, I've got too many screens going here at the moment. Greenways. So there are 3 references to greenways in this document. And there's a map that shows greenways as well. There are references to working closely with Metro Vancouver. So in the session that I attended, the whole question of the coordination of the development of the greenways sort of came up, and it really came up because of some puzzlement on my part, and the fellow from from Translink jumping in and saying, essentially there needs to be some sort of coordinating body, because otherwise it's, what is it, 21 municipalities or electoral area and the First Nation, all trying to figure out working independently with Metro Vancouver and with Translink and potentially with private landowners. I mean, if the greenways are going to be a significant part of this strategy, and I think they're supposed to be, but they don't have a strong enough presence. So I suppose my feedback would be to go further in clarifying how the greenways system is going to work in Transport 2050. Sorry, that wasn't very articulate, but that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. All right, so I think, again, for this long-term plan, what I propose is that staff will consolidate the comments that we've heard here today. Lots of really good points, a lot more than what was just recommended in the staff report. And we'll draft that and bring it back to the regular council meeting for consideration on November 22nd. Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thank you. Just another note about the map that Councillor Nicholson was just speaking about, which I'm scrolling madly back to. It looks to me like all the maps in this Transport 2050 have Bowen down as urban. So that might be an overall comment to make. They're all white. We're white in all of them. And the second thing is thank you. That map, I think we should ask that the regional cycling network be linked specifically to access to nature, because it talks about it in the access to nature part, but this looks also like access to nature could be part of this. So it just seems to need a link there. Thank you. Just for, so councillors know too, Bowen has, obviously we've got the Parks and Greenways, Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Commission. The way we've used greenways, the term greenways in the past on Bowen has been bigger, connected green spaces. So they have, so it's kind of a slightly different context. It's not the same as a linear transportation corridor as the term is used more commonly nowadays regionally. So if there's confusion, let me know and I'll point you to where you can look it up more. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you everyone for your comments. So next on the agenda would be moving to the Islands Trust discussion. Should we take a break? Do people need a 5-minute bio break or anything like that?
Need to get more tea, please.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Five
So report back here, let's call it 10:25.
Yeah.
10:25?
2:25?
Oh, sorry, 2:25. Thank you.
I knew what you meant.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right, perfect.
Hey, Gary, you did a painting as well for the art show?
Unmuted. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, it was fun. I did one. I couldn't get there on the evening, but I managed to. I did some at home, and it was,
Oh, good for you.
it was
Good for
fun.
you. Yeah, there was a lot of revelations that came out of that. It is extraordinarily tough, and I really starting to understand the whole concept of the art of the painting and that sort of thing, which was, that's a good lesson in itself, but it's hard. It's really hard, but a lot of fun. And I'll tell you, there's also a lot of very talented people. Probably half the people in the room came out with some very, very extraordinary paintings in a short period of time.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And Sophie's just reminded us that we're still on YouTube. So hi, YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Gary and I are artists.
Yeah, that's right. So to speak.
There are a lot of talented folks on Bowen.
Oh, amazing.
For sure.
Yeah.
That looked like a pretty neat event.
Yeah, it was fun. A lot of fun.
Well, the show opens later this week? No, next week.
Next week, yeah. The 11th, I think, eh?
Yeah, I think so. So this is an advertisement.
Yes, there
As
you
of the 11th,
go. Live.
there'll be a live auction.
Yeah. God, I hope not. Thank you. Right, I don't know if the other folks are going to actually show up here, but they seem to be online, so that's great. If you want to continue along, Liam, that's great.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm going to actually, hold on a second here. Share my screen again. So you should be seeing the Transport 2050 slide.
Correct.
And now we just got to go back to the beginning, and I have to go through all of them again this way. Okay. So Islands Trust draft policy statement. Apologize for the jumbled crowdedness of this slide. It's just to provide a bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about, which is following the exact same content of the staff report. And we have had some good presentations by the Islands Trust staff too. So some of this will not be so new to you, but we will be getting a little more into the details. We'll do context, approval process, First Nations, general comments, and then we'll get into specific items. And as we go, maybe what we'll do is we'll go to a slide on especially when we get to the specific items, and we can pause there for comment. And I do think that there may be other comments from councillors on perhaps other things as well. And so maybe what we can do is, if we don't have, we can hold those comments until the end. So we get through these ones that have been identified. And then if there's completely net new items that you want to discuss, then hold those to the end. That would be great. The context of the Islands Trust policy statement, I think we all understand, is that the Islands Trust staff used this image in their documentation, which I cribbed because I thought it was really good to show how it is similar, not identical, but similar to regional districts' regional growth strategies. Not every regional district in the province has a regional growth strategy, but if they do have a regional growth strategy, then it's required that the local member municipalities must sign on to that regional growth strategy. Essentially, they're approving it. And once that's been approved, there's the requirement to ensure that official community plans and land use bylaws are in alignment with that regional growth strategy. So the same applies to the Islands Trust policy statement. And so it's basically a very similar relationship. The approval timelines, this is the original approval timeline that was set out for the Islands 2050 plan. And the red circle in the middle is where we are currently at today, and it's sort of from a stage, not from a date. So we're really between stage 4 and stage 5. Stage 4 is the drafting of the policy statement, and stage 5 was the first reading. I think we all know that the first reading was delayed due to a request from the public to seek additional time to better understand the draft statement. And the Islands Trust staff and the Islands Trust Council heard that very clearly and have been working hard to develop a more comprehensive and more perhaps a more robust engagement strategy. And they have hired a consultant to do just that. And they're looking to wrap up that engagement strategy by April 2022. And that with the goal of still trying to get to ministerial approval by the end of summer 2022. So in the original strategy and approach, there was quite a bit of time between first reading and second reading to allow for stakeholders to review and provide comment. I imagine what we'll see is the time frame between first reading and second reading being much more condensed, because they're going to be doing a much more robust engagement in advance of that first reading. Does Councillor or Trustee Fast or Kale, do you know when first reading is being considered at this point in time? Or Councillor Fast, you're muted.
There we go. Yeah, there's a press release just came out, I think yesterday, about where we're at. And we're still looking, right now we're seeking qualified firms to design, lead, and implement this next robust phase of public engagement. The way I understand it is up till now, it's been approximately like the Metro Vancouver process, pretty similar. But at this point, public wanted more engagement, so we are extending that and spending money on consultants to help us do that. And I think that we're hoping that it'll come to Trust Council before the end of the term, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen because there's so many factors involved, including First Nations input. Islands Trust passed a declaration of reconciliation some years ago. And so when the province's DRIPA, Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act, passed, we, as the Islands Trust, began early and meaningful engagement with First Nations as well, of which there are like 30. So that's another element in this that's not as visible, but there are new voices coming into the conversations, and timelines may not be the kind of thing that Metro Vancouver can lay out so clearly. So we don't have a date for first reading.
at this point.
We were hoping that that would have been September, but here we are going into another phase of engagement. So I would be reluctant to give a date at this moment. Maybe my fellow trustee has a different point of view.
No, I have no quarrel at all with what Councillor Faster said. What I do feel is this: by the time we get the consultants agreed, probably will be Christmas, New Year. By the time they get their act together and start the consultation period, we will be well into spring and probably into summer. And what I'm hearing from many of my my trustee colleagues is that they believe that this will be an election issue. So I see this not taking place, if I was a betting person, within the life of this Trust Council. Now that's just me saying that's what I believe. I have no secret information or no grounds. It's just, I think Sir Alan Fast laid it out very clearly. I actually think it would be incredibly difficult to given the nature of Islands Trust and the way we're constructed, to get this done within this term. And I think there will be some resistance as well in rushing this into first reading, as there was the first time, unless everybody is really satisfied that true discussion has taken place.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Fast and Kale. So with that, I don't feel worried that we are not meeting the Islands Trust staff's request to have it in to them already. Like that, it's, to me, I think it's going to be okay to have it by November 22nd. So it's good to know. Okay, great. All right. So the first item is about First Nations, and thank you, Councillor Fast, for that additional information about the First Nation engagement. It's a critical piece, and you know, BIM staff completely support the additional recognition and engagement with First Nations in this policy. And interestingly enough, too, recent legislative amendments that were requested by the Trust to the province were just approved, and so that the First Nations are more expressly named in the Trust Act for being required to be engaged in this process. So that's great news. One just minor comment is that when I was reading the policy statement, there's a lot of really good recognition and understanding of the importance of that First Nation engagement. I just want to make sure that the document it comes across as authentically as it is, because I believe that it is authentic and it is real, but that just sometimes when there's a repetitiveness of it, that it can be disarming. So, but from a staff perspective, there's just general support for that. So I want to pause here to just see, because these are new statements and new aspects of the policy statement. And so let's take a pause here. And Councillor Kale, I believe, had his hand up first.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that comment, indeed. And it's a thought raised by many that in our total desire to give the First Nations their proper place in this document, it has resulted in a rather unfortunate sort of cut and paste, add where possible approach. And I think a lot of people are asking that the proper approach to First Nations, which applies to the entire document, would be recorded at some point earlier in the document to save this really unfortunate and I think grammatically inferior repetition. So we need to say what has to be said, and I think we need to say it clearly, and I think we need to say it once to avoid what we have now, which will also, so it's really a wordsmithing and word polishing idea, but it's the very real thing is, please reduce the repetition, say it once, say it right, say it properly. And I think that is getting some traction generally.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kale. Councillor Fast.
Sure, thank you. I think it would be great to make that comment. The draft was written in color, not the way you've got it there. So each section was highlighted as it was added to the current version. It may just be a reflection of the state of the draft, because as you mentioned in the Islands Trust Act, First Nations were excluded. And meanwhile, we're beginning this reconciliation stage 1 of early and meaningful engagement. We're having to build relationships as the Islands Trust. So that may be why it was repeated again and again, was to make sure that we got comment at all these places.
Right.
And that may well, at your pair of eyes looking at it that way, I think that would be good to mention. But right now, the object of the Islands Trust, the mandate, has been changed so that it actually says collaborate with neighboring municipalities and regional district, ... and First Nations. So that's different now. Maybe the context doesn't need to be included so often.
Great, thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Nicholson.
I was wondering, must the First Nations engagement be completed prior to the adoption of the policy statement?
I think that the minister who ultimately approves, would want to see that engagement. I can't speak on behalf of the minister, right? Councillor Fast, Trustee Fast.
Sure, Trustee Fast, for this one, that's a really good question. And what we being the trust, Islands Trust, have been doing is running a kind of a parallel process. So you will see back in July, First Nations engagement status report is in the materials that were provided to Trust Council with the draft. And we have, just as of last week, our senior intergovernmental policy advisor, Lisa Wilcox, who used to be Rights and Title for manager for Squamish Nation, they've been meeting with the Minister of Mir. Can't remember his name at the moment, but that's the Minister of Indigenous Rights and Relationships or something. And now Islands Trust has an executive director from that ministry to work with Islands Trust. And up till now, they've been asking Islands Trust to kind of take the lead, and this way it will even reinforce that. So we have, I guess what I should say is, the province, the ministry, is working with Islands Trust and both permitting this kind of consultation to go ahead and assisting. So they'll be all involved. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the parallel tracks and
Well,
movement on the tracks potentially being at a different pace. But that's all speculative. I appreciate your responses. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide, if I can make it work. Wait, slow down. Okay, here we go. So general comments. In general, staff found there to be really broad, undefined terminology that will challenge implementation of the proposed policies. Examples include terms like carrying capacity, sustainability, and small scale, which are used a lot throughout the document. And so staff recommend using more specific terms or providing definitions or a glossary, as Councillor Kale identified for the Metro one. And in addition, the term shall appears approximately 90 times throughout the document. And we did talk with, I should also back it up, I guess, a little bit and say that, staff had a very positive and engaged discussion with the Islands Trust staff, with the CAO and Director of Planning and Senior Policy Analyst Lisa Wilcox as well, and others. And they agreed that there may be a need to do a more of a detailed analysis of wherever there is a statement of shall, because that term effectively binds the municipality into action. And so we want to be really attuned to everywhere there's a term shall. It shall turn up more in the directives. So there's two aspects to the policy statement. One is policy statements that Trust Council needs to consider in their thinking and their planning and their decision making. And then there's directives where specific things will occur or shall occur. And so staff recommend that the Islands Trust, in collaboration with us, develop a chart or checklist of all the instances of where this term is used and the implications to Bowen Island. So I'll pause there and open it up for comments. Councillor Bass?
I just wanted to mention, this is the Islands Trust checklist that we've seen behind different rezonings and things. These are the directive policies that Liam's referring to. So it's updating this list as well.
Councillor Kale.
Yeah, Liam, you probably touched on one of the biggest issues for many of the trustees. It's not just the municipalities, but for the local councils as well. You're a few shalls ahead of me. I counted 77, a great number of which actually were for the executive, so there's going to be a lot of discussion. The word shall, if you shall do something, then you're going to ask, what shall I do? And then you will probably follow that up in what time shall I do it? So I'm glad this is being highlighted. Not to elaborate, if it's being highlighted, it's good. Let's work on what it means, because it's raised a lot of questions, which I'm sure you can understand. And the questions aren't going away till each one of the shalls has been more closely reviewed and evaluated. Because as you can imagine, everyone's got their own opinion on it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fast.
Sure, I'll just mention that I was one of the people who, when trustees gave their input, part of my input was I thought there should be more shalls, because what's the point of having an area set aside to preserve and protect if it's all up to the local communities about what they do, if everything is voluntary. So I, coming from a protected areas background anyway, I thought it should be strengthened with the biodiversity crisis that we're in, and with the pressures and challenges facing the Islands Trust area. So there's, so I wouldn't be in support of taking it out, but I'm also I'm not going to fight it here at Bowen Council. I would be interested in what Bowen Council wants to bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. And just to be clear, from a staff perspective, we're not against it. We just want to understand it. Councillor Nicholson.
Just to follow up, both of you said it. What is it?
Not against the use of the term shall, and against having directives that require the municipality to take action or do something specific. It's just wanting to be certain of what all of those things are.
Right.
Yeah.
And my point was simply a suggestion. If this chart does come together, I think it might be quite helpful to share it with the other trustees in the Islands Trust, because presumably they're getting their heads around what this might mean in practice as opposed to in language.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, the chart would be, I think, extremely helpful, and it speaks to further comments that we'll discuss around checklists and things like Councillor Fash showed. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Housing. This is a net new policy direction for the Islands Trust, and the policy statement contemplates several policy positions to advance affordable housing. BIM staff seek clarity on how this new policy will align with the core mandate of the trust of preserve and protect the environment and the character of the island. And we had a good discussion with Islands Trust staff about this very issue, where we believe there needs to be clarity because there could be seen as conflict between the desire to maintain the existing character and feel of an island versus the desire to increase densification. And there's terms throughout the document like compact, complete communities and such that we just want to ensure that we have clarity on if these housing policies get adopted, how will our development proposals meet the test of compliance that is being set out. So BIM staff recommend that if these policies are advanced, that some type of checklists are created for BIM staff to ensure submissions to the Islands Trust can clearly and consistently meet the test that's being applied. Councillor Nicholson has her hand up.
Yeah, it's regarding the 6.2.4.
I can bring up the actual document too, if that would be helpful for folks.
Sure, please.
Okay. Apologies for the color. I hope you're able to still
It's
read.
pretty horrible.
Yeah, pretty.
Yeah. So my point, so 6.2.4. My point is that there's an assumption in that that clause that I'm not sure I agree with, which is where it says where density increases could support safe, etc. If you take that piece out, where density increases could support, and just focus on identifying appropriate locations for safe, secure, and affordable housing. If you get the difference, is that the assumption in the original is that the solution is greater density. Whereas if you take that out, you open up the possibility of there being other solutions that would provide safe, secure, and affordable housing that doesn't necessarily relate to density. So it's quite a specific point, but it's one I wanted to make because the emphasis on greater density, as your report points out, it kind of goes against how the Islands Trust will balance the existing form and character of island communities, which are generally not compact, with this new priority of focusing on compact communities. Islands are pretty compact to begin with.
Yep.
Small scale, yes. Good point.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Hawking.
Thank you, Liam. I'm not sure I agree with Maureen. I found this to be interesting. I mean, this is kind of the crux of the thing. I recognize we've got, our islands are, for the most part, like much of Bowen Island is, very low density, and that's kind of the way it looks, and that has a rural feel about it and all that. And but to address affordability and to protect nature to the great extent we can, I don't see that there's any alternative but increasing density in certain areas. So I looked at this and I thought, yep, I agree with this. And I recognize it's tricky. I recognize that it involves thinking things through carefully and probably making some compromises, but I don't see the alternative. So I don't have a very clear comment here, but I recognize that this is a tricky area, and I support the idea of recognizing that density increases will be necessary because land is expensive, and that's one of the ways you address costs.
If I could just respond to that very briefly.
Sure.
I read this through the lens of all of the discussion that we had at our COW on housing, where there was a substantive discussion of density and how well or how poorly that had worked for our island in terms of increasing the amount of affordable housing stock. So that's where I'm coming from and looking at this statement and thinking that there's been a judgment here that reflects the same kind of judgment that was made for us many years ago that resulted in, that had mixed results, shall we say.
Sure.
So a little bit of clarification.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Maureen, and thank you for the opportunity to say something on this. It's a tricky area. Thank you, Liam. On to others.
Okay, Councillor Kale.
Yeah, actually, I appreciate the comments made by Councillor Nicholson and by Councillor Hocking, because it shows the dichotomy that this new issue of housing faces. I'm part of the Trust Programs Committee that's been working on this document. And at a meeting, I think about 3 months ago, actually the vote was drawn, and that was because of absenteeism. It was drawn 5-5 to actually remove all items in red from this document. The feeling being that the Islands Trust had overreached itself and overarched itself, and there were other groups of people capable of dealing with housing issues. And whilst there are things the Islands Trust through its planning can do, there will be a very, I think, heated or energetic discussion amongst the representatives around the table, around the trustees, as whether this issue of housing is one in which the Islands Trust should get involved. So I don't know the outcome of that, but I can tell you there will be that discussion, because many feel that, no, this is something, we don't have money, we have no way of funding it. We have ways of helping, of course, through planning, but this is in excess of our purview. So I don't put that up for necessarily further discussion, but I just want you to know that there is very much a schism amongst the Islands Trust on this whole housing issue amongst the trustees. I personally hope it gets removed. I don't think it has a place with the Islands Trust, and that would be where my vote goes, but time will tell.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris.
Well, I guess the whole thing boils down to, what do you mean by density increases? And I'm siding with Councillor Nicholson that I think density increases implying that you're only going to increase the density in areas that already have housing. And I think there are other areas on islands that are on bus routes or whatever, where there isn't any housing, and housing could be put in without a detriment to, and so I'm kind of supporting that. And I guess the whole discussion about housing and some of the other areas as well, because we're a municipality, there are some areas where we can actually do things which the local trust committees cannot.
Correct.
Like, we've got a reserve fund for housing, hasn't got a lot of money in it, but we can have one, and we can fund the development of housing from that reserve fund. Well, I don't think the local trust committees can do that. All they can do is put some areas in their land use bylaws and OCPs that these would be suitable areas to have affordable housing in, or set a limit to have, a policy, I guess, like we've got, but they can't actually deliver. And then the other is some of the discussions about getting more authority to do things. Well, I don't think we should be paying the costs of the trust to get more authority to do things that we've already got the authority to do.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Fast.
Thank you. This is interesting because yesterday I was chairing a local trust committee on Denman, where we have just completed a rezoning for affordable seniors housing, and we gave first reading yesterday to another affordable housing project for 20 units. And so there are rezonings that happen, and like whenever an application comes in, the local authority has to respond to those. And also, well, there's various things the Islands Trust can do in terms of housing covenants and housing agreements. And the Denman, for example, we set a one of these rental only zones into the land use bylaw, so it can be a possibility, and the OCP, so it can be a possibility for rezonings. And that's what this new affordable housing project is taking advantage of. And so sort of streamlining things so that not every project has to reinvent the wheel. Anyway, there's a bunch of things we can do. And why do we do them? Because the object of the Islands Trust Act doesn't only relate to ecosystem protection, it relates to the unique amenities of an island, which is a broad term. And but many people nowadays think that humans as part of nature are also stewards of nature. And when you have communities with workers and children and all a diverse kind of community, then you have the opportunity to take better care of nature. And that's some links that I put into the paper. I was hoping that the image would come out, because the old thinking used to be you put a dotted line around it, you kept people out of nature. That's how you protected it. And now working with community groups and stewardship groups and First Nations and all kinds of people in a community is how current thinking is going in terms of how to best protect nature. And it also fits with the mandate of island character and beautiful places that people would like to come to, rather than just big houses in that are empty half the year kind of thing, you know. And so these are all topics we've talked about on Bowen as well. And Councillor Kale is correct. There's lots of discussion at Trust Council about this too. And anyway, I'd encourage you to have a look at the links that the link that I put into the just figure 11 in that paper would be, I'd be interested in your take on it. Anybody who looks at it, thank you.
Sorry, what link are you talking about?
In the chat.
Oh, okay.
I put a link to figure 11 in a paper that was set up for the lead up to COP26, basically.
Okay. So, Councillor or Mayor Ander.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. I tend to, obviously, I agree with the Michael on this one. I don't think the trust should be getting into housing. I think it's not homogenous through all the islands. We're all very, very specific, and Bowen has its own unique issues that we have to deal with. We can't be forced into a situation where we're putting in some kind of housing that isn't going to work on Bowen Island. I think the housing on Bowen Island is probably the most expensive housing of any of the Gulf Islands. And we have to take that into consideration. And it's not easy for us. We have a very specific type of housing and construction industry here that isn't probably prevalent on the rest of the islands. So I just don't think the trust should be meddling in what we require on the island. I think I find that the whole housing thing, which the trust knows nothing about, is a little bit overreaching, absolutely overreaching and authoritarian, very authoritarian of them. And I think they're going to have to back off that one. I just don't see it happening. I just don't think they can dictate what housing goes on the islands. It's just not possible. It's not realistic. Anyway, that's my comment.
Okay.
One.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Ender. And Councillor Morris, you still have your hand up. Okay. So I just want to do a bit of a time check where we are scheduled to go to 4. We have at least 8 more specific issues to talk about. I know there's some others that some councillors want to bring up, and there's some next steps and things like that. So I'm just going to ask that we try to avoid repetition if possible, and be as concise as we can. And certainly, if necessary, we can also find more time, because this is important, and I don't want to gloss over any of this. So, okay, I am going to minimize this and bring us back to the next slide, which is the ban on desalination. The draft policy statement contemplates a ban on new desalination water treatment plants, and it cites the need to reduce concerns around energy consumption and impacts on the marine and coastal environments. And BIM staff identify that desalination within the context of scarce freshwater resources actually may be a more ecologically sensitive approach to meet drinking water demand. Climate change also may drive the need to move to desalination in order to protect those scarce freshwater resources for ecological systems. And advances in technology and management practices can mitigate some of the concerns around energy consumption and ecosystem impacts. Desalination is becoming more and more efficient all the time. I personally have experience working with desalination plants in remote areas of the world, and know that it can be done with a very ecologically sensitive approach. And so BIM staff recommend removing this policy altogether. And I'll pause there. And Councillor Hawking.
Sure, thank you, Liam. So I read your analysis, and just a quick statement. I thought it seemed solid, and I agree with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris.
I agree entirely, and I've got experience with 2 desalination plants that have actually provided the general public with some more water that they needed this summer.
Great, thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the Islands Trust was surprised at the number of desalination plants that have been used in the Islands Trust up till now. They've been kind of under the radar. I think this comment may have come from First Nations, but I'm not sure about that. I think that part of the reason, besides the energy efficiency, part of the reason is where is the water being drawn from, and where is the fairly toxic brine being put. It's a pollution-related topic. If concentrated brine sinks down, usually a little pipe that goes out into the water, the concentrated brine sinks down and flows over the eelgrass and kills it, for example. There may be lots of good places to put it, and I certainly don't have a problem with the comment. The other thing I will mention, though, is meets demand. The Islands Trust has always had a sustainability focus in terms of living within the means of an island, or staying within the ecological limits of an island. And the idea of bringing in more fresh water has been one of those limits, like that has been used. And so this would be a different way. Meeting demand is not necessarily part of what the mandate of the Islands Trust is. And so I just wanted to mention that is its effect on the surrounding marine ecosystems, which are also part of the Islands Trust. It's not only terrestrial. And there's been more information because these kinds of comments came up. I just wanted to say there's at the islandstrust.bc.ca web pages, there's a frequently asked questions part that has been expanded partly because of these questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kale.
Yeah, agree that it should go away. And that's also the opinion of many of the other trustees. And I think the executive committee are going to hear that loud and clear. So yeah, let's turf this one.
Okay, Councillor Nicholson.
I also agree that it should be removed. I was actually quite surprised to see it, and just before we leave the topic, I wonder if Councillor Fast could say a little bit about the extent to which desalination plants are being used.
I'll tell you what I gather, and this isn't anything special knowledge for executive committee or anything. This is just information that came to Trust Council, which is where these decisions will be made, not at executive committee. I think we didn't have any way of knowing where they were or how they're registered. They're not something that is on any maps that the Islands Trust had. And this was a concern raised through the consultation process. And so we reflected that consultation in this very draft document. Now we're hearing that lots of people have them, as what I gather. And I think there's another point here is about the scale of desalination plants. Perhaps a small one for one house at a limited capacity, with careful placement of the intake and the outflow, or some other means of disposing safely of the concentrated brine with the metals and things in it. Let's make that comment. But if we're talking about plants for Ganges Village or something like that, maybe that's a different scale. And I'm not sure what was meant by the consultation that the Islands Trust received. It's a big topic, I've learned. For example, what is that big bay? Monterey Bay, they're not allowed there because that's a protected area and a marine protected area. And under some ways of looking at it, the Islands Trust is a marine protected area that we're supposed to preserve and protect it and the ecology in it. So where does the pollution go? And that has to be considered, I think. I don't know if that helps. I don't know very much.
It does, but what it also does is it brings me back to the last sentence in the staff report, which is staff would instead prefer any policies to focus on regulating negative impact rather than an outright ban. And it sounds as though council, majority of council at least, isn't in favor of an outright ban, but perhaps there is a need for some sort of regulation of negative impacts. But maybe that's covered already under existing environmental regulations.
For any large scale desalination plant, you're not going to be able to discharge to the marine environment without a permit.
Right.
And like I worked in the Galapagos, supporting the largest municipality in the Galapagos, of population of about 12,000 people, on their brand new desalination plant, and helping them set up operation of that. And that is a highly sensitive area. So they have a lot of attention paid to the impacts of that type of facility.
Thank you.
I think there's often an assumption that there's regulations for these things. It's strange that the Islands Trust is not aware of these recommendations. I thought there would be regulations around transport of hazardous materials by ship, but there are no regulations for transporting LNG. Anyway, even our discharge from Cove Bay drinking water treatment plant is something that is regulated, right? Which is a terrestrial based system. So. I think it's a scale kind of thing, I suspect. And I just know that what I've said, I don't know anymore. But can I ask, where was that little piece you were reading from, Maureen? Because I don't see it on the screen there.
No, it's not. It's part of the staff report, which.
Okay.
It's on page 6 of the.
Thank you. Thank you. Help me find my place.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Ender.
Yeah, just the fact that I think we all agree that the trust jumped the gun on this one. I think it was more about limiting development. That's obviously why it was in there, as Sue Ellen said, but
I didn't say that.
well, you did indirectly, you did, yeah. I think say is about how much is out there, and I think there has to be considerations. Obviously, nothing's going to be put into the ocean, but to just put it out as a ban is not very forward thinking, especially in this day and age and the technology we have going forward. So I'm not in favor of the ban.
Okay, moving on then, I'm going to move to the next one. It's a ban on docks. So the draft policy statement contemplates a ban on new docks throughout the trust area unless the property is only accessible by water. Docks are a hot issue here on Bowen and anywhere in the island. But I do want to, you're all aware that we currently have regulations in place and through our land use bylaw. And it is part of the island plan, as although I know that we haven't done enough work on that. There's more work to be done. But BIM staff, in recognition that we have our own regulation and that we do approach docks very sensitively and comprehensively, that staff recommend that the policy recognize that island municipalities have their own authority and ability to regulate such matters and be exempt from this policy. So open it up for discussion. Councillor Kale.
Yes, briefly, we have submitted the policy that we have at the moment regulating docks to the Trust Programs Committee, and hopefully that will be forward for consideration. So Bowen's current situation has been forwarded, and frankly, for some, held up as an example of how other islands might wish to review requests for docks. So that has been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nicholson.
I support the staff report as written.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fast.
I just wanted to say that some islands don't permit any docks. So it's not sort of throughout the islands, it's depending on the island. That's all.
Okay. Okay. Moving on. Ban on hard shores. The draft policy statement contemplates a ban on seawalls and other hard shoreline armoring throughout the trust area. Being an island necessitates some shoreline hardening. It's not preferred, and I think staff understand the sensitivity that's needed to mitigate and minimize shoreline hardening, but it's recognized that it's also a necessity as being an island. It's really the only way we're going to be able to provide for access and egress to the island, and other access points for accessing the marine environment. And so BIM staff recommend that the policy identify the ability for exemptions and flexibility on the issue. We don't necessarily recommend removing it, but just that recognize the need for flexibility. Councillor Hawking.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, I also agree with the staff report on this. Obviously, hardening shores is something we should avoid to the greatest extent possible for all kinds of reasons. Particularly the life of fish, but there needs to be some flexibility in some areas, obviously. So I support the staff report. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Moving on. Ban on oil tankers. The draft policy statement contemplates a ban on oil tanker anchoring and or transiting the waters surrounding the Island Trust area. I raised this with Islands Trust staff, which, I mean, this does impact Bowen Island, but the point that I was raising directly as a good example isn't impacting Bowen Island. It's rather that it's the fuel depot for Vancouver Island is in Cherry Point, directly adjacent to Salt Spring. And so to negate the ability for there be able to have a fuel depot there would negate the ability for anyone on the islands, including the Trust Islands, to have fuel, which I don't think was contemplated or desired. And so I do think I am fully supportive of getting off of fuel as we know it, but recognize that it's an iterative process, and so BIM staff recommend reconsidering the language associated with this ban and be a little more sensitive to the neighboring communities and the continued need for fossil fuels as we transition away from carbon-based economies. Councillor Fast.
Thanks. I might be able to provide some clarity here. In this exact same way as your previous one, where the idea of some shoreline hardening might be needed, but where exactly and what conditions would be similar. For this, I think, I don't, tankers, like this speaks specifically to oil tankers. And I don't know if you know, but in May, there was a small oil tanker that went through Active Pass right behind a ferry. And now they've got a Pacific Pilotage has made a rule and that kind of thing about that. But barges are usually how fuel gets around between the islands and among the islands. Barges with a couple of tugs on them, guiding them, keeping it safer. And so this is kind of a scale thing. The freighter anchorages and the oil tankers are the big spills that could happen, and the big problems. And so I just wanted to raise that it doesn't stop barges and other kinds of fuel deliveries, including through Polier Pass and some of the other quite narrow active passes. And I wanted to mention having this kind of language in here about oil tankers also assists when communities are interested in managing or interested in not having LNG tankers coming by, that kind of thing. This kind of language could help, but I thought that might help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nicholson.
My question's about your slides, Liam. BIM staff recommends reconsidering the language associated with this proposed ban. What do you mean?
I think along the lines of what Councillor Fast is saying is that we recognize there's a desire to limit tanker traffic in the islands from sensitive areas. And so, but we hope that the Islands Trust recognize that there's still a need for oil tanker traffic, and they will with certainty have to transit the Trust area. The Trust area extends across the Salish Sea, and the tankers have to go through there. And the oil tankers have to go to Cherry Point. So they have to go between, I think it's Valdez Passage between Salt Spring and Vancouver Island. Mm-hmm. And so I just hope that there's a recognition of the neighboring communities' needs, as well as the hard reality that oil tankers must transit Trust area waters, and there's no quick and easy way to stop that.
Thank you.
I don't think they do. They have to go through boundary paths. So down and across and, you know, the few little places. Anyway, I'll stop. I get your point.
Yeah, but they like the trust area extends all the way from Howe Sound to effectively Schwartz Bay. And so with the way it's written right now, it's saying no oil tankers will transit trust area waters. And that's not feasible. So.
I'm just suggesting that you'd use the same language as you used in the previous one for saying clarify the language of where. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Nicholson, anything more? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Well, I guess this is my question is, what is the point of putting something in that's a jurisdictional issue? And I think the province already tried to ban tanker traffic and got thrown out by the Supreme Court of Canada. So to me, it's something that there's no jurisdiction over, and all the other reasons that it's being, you know, that Liam's already mentioned. I think it should just be removed.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morris. Okay, moving on. Ban on clear cuts. The draft policy statement contemplates a ban on clear cutting as well as securing additional new authorities to regulate tree cutting within the trust area. BIM staff are concerned that there may be duplicative or conflicting authorities between BIM and the Islands Trust should such an authority be granted to the Islands Trust. As a municipality, BIM has the authority under the community charter to regulate tree cutting. And so just to add to this, BIM staff recognize the intent of banning clear cutting, but also BIM staff do want to recognize that there may be extenuating circumstances where clear cut is necessary, or perhaps we need better definitions around what clear cut is, and are we using provincial definitions or what definitions are being used? So BIM staff recommend seeking further details and an explanation of how the proposed authority would be put into practice, and more precise understanding of where it would be applicable is required. So for example, like would it have authority within an island municipality? So we may want to see similar language to the hard shore one, perhaps, or yeah. So Councillor Morris.
My same comments about concurrent authority. At this point, I don't know what you're talking about when you talk about clear cutting, because usually, other than somebody clearing a lot to build their house, if we're talking about trying to regulate clear cutting in the Crown lands, we don't have any authority for that, nor does the Islands Trust. And then my other comment is along the lines of yours, that we've all already got the authority to do it. So I have no desire to contribute to the Islands Trust getting authority to do it. And would it be for the local trust committees? And in which case it should be at the local planning costs. And if it was to be an Islands Trust, then all the issues you've raised about concurrent authorities and different rules. So there's forest practices reviews going on right now with the province. I think that would be, you know, better. I'm not quite sure what they're trying to accomplish with this.
Right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hawking.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. I guess my question is an issue that Councillor Morris raised is, would the Islands Trust have authority on the provincial Crown lands? I mean, if within the trust area, does that therefore include provincial Crown lands?
No.
Okay, all right, then this becomes less important. Thanks.
Councillor Fast.
Not everything that's in the policy statement is currently in the jurisdiction of the Islands Trust. Some of these things are things that we advocate for in order to protect and preserve. And so just because it's not there now doesn't mean we can't work towards having a better way to manage clear cutting through the trust area. Some of the lands in the trust area, those of you who remember Galliano, are owned by big timber companies.
Yeah.
And so industrial logging has happened, and will happen also on something called private managed forest lands, which we don't have on Bowen, but many of the other islands have. So I think that one way to think about it might be is clear cutting, including logging of old growth forests, something that should be happening in the Islands Trust as a preserve and protect ecosystems kind of place, or not. And because we do advocate, we, Islands Trust, and sometimes Bowen Island Municipality, write letters to the province, right? And ask for this and that and make recommendations. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fast. Okay,
Sorry,
Councillor Hocking?
Yeah, back to me. Sue Ellen, I've forgotten all about that land on Salt Spring. Yeah, I'm very much opposed to clear cutting in various situations. So I don't want to be stopping the Islands Trust from taking a strong stand in this. One of my sons is a scientist who's doing a bunch of work on this right now, and he was just telling me about the studies that he was doing. And yeah, I'm very happy to stop clear cutting in any way we possibly can, and certainly within the Islands Trust. So I'm struggling a little with this one. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fast. And I think, as you'll note in the staff recommendation, we focus more on the concurrent authority issue around regulating of tree cutting than clear cutting, because I think staff agree. So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay, moving along.
Maureen?
Councillor.
Just a point. I mean, we have written several times and incorporated in our island plan our opposition to commercial industrial scale logging on Bowen. I wonder if that phrase might be useful in this discussion. And then I guess the other question I have is, I remember a decade or so ago, there was an attempt to introduce a tree cutting bylaw. It was called something else on Bowen Island. Would this be anticipated to have an impact on individual private property owners?
Yeah.
It would.
It
Well, I
could.
think so, yeah. Well, yeah, it would, could, yeah.
If I could just say, this is the policy statement, and whatever a local trust committee or Bowen Island Municipality had in place when and if this a draft like this passes, will stay in place. It's grandfathered, if you want, until an update of an official community plan or official community plan is reviewed, and then whatever is put into the official community plan wouldn't be allowed to be against what's in the policy statement. So it's not like top down, and I don't know if it would affect Bowen at all. That's a good question. And in fact, it might just be parallel kind of giving local trust areas the opportunity to enact tree cutting rules, for example, to protect trees over a certain size along certain shorelines, for example. And if they chose to.
Okay. Okay.
Giving them the tool.
I guess I agree with the staff recommendation that further details of this are needed and how exactly it might work. Seems to be a lot of questions here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kale.
Yes, just very briefly, further details are needed. I endorse what Councillor Nicholson just said. What many of the trustees are concerned about, that if banning of not just clear cuts, but tree cutting generally is forecasted and anticipated. There will be the biggest sound of chainsaws from north to south on the Gulf Island you've ever heard. So there are a lot of concerns, genuine concerns about this, and it needs a lot more careful, reflective thought on where we're going with this, and also to make sure we're not tripping over one another's regulations, and have it grandfathered subject to the next review of our strategic plan for the island. Well, that would make a lot of people very nervous, because that could be done in the next couple of years. So yeah, this is something people are asking: more time, please, more thought and more care, because people can see the unintended consequences and the adverse effects of this if it was to be introduced clumsily.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Okay, moving along. Wildfire protection. The draft policy statement has a provision for wildfire risk mitigation identified in section 6.1. And it's not identified below. Sorry about that on my slide here. Wildfire mitigation measures need to be tailored to each biogeoclimatic zone. And as such, BIM staff feel that it is important to ensure that any measures promoted by the Islands Trust need to take those factors into consideration. And we do note that they do, and we've had good discussions with staff about that. And we know that Islands Trust staff are keenly aware of this. And so we just want to make sure that the policy statement recognizes that. And so that if we lose that corporate knowledge or what have you, that it's actually there properly. So BIM staff recommend that reference to wildfire protection needs to specifically mention relevant practices for our biogeoclimatic zone. Councillor Morris.
The previous statement about tree cutting and all that sort of stuff totally ignores the need to consider wildfire protection. So you've got you could have two different policies that are contrary to one another.
Yeah, you'll have to.
Yeah,
you'll have to always try to balance those competing interests, right? And I think that's the point that's being made here too, is that studies and evidence is showing that the practices of smart principles from the interior don't necessarily apply here on the coast. And so vegetation removal isn't the only approach to wildfire risk mitigation.
but in the other section, we haven't defined, is a clear cut a 6x6 area, like 6 feet by 6 feet, or 6 meters by 6 meters, or 600 meters by 600 meters. And if you've got a stand of dead trees, it might be kind of a good idea to clear cut them.
Right. Okay. Any additional comments? Okay. Moving on, species at risk. So in BIM staff's review of the policy statement, we believe that it can go further to consider protection of species at risk as designated under SARA, the Species at Risk Act. Currently, the policy focuses on freshwater aquatic species at risk, and BIM staff would advocate for the need to include flora and fauna beyond the aquatic, freshwater aquatic species. We understand that the Islands Trust area is home to a very large number of species on the SARA list. And so we would just recommend, and then we made this recommendation to Islands Trust staff and they were appreciative of it. And so we just recommend expanding this to include flora and other fauna beyond aquatic species. Councillor Morris.
Can you define a fauna for me, please?
Animals.
So what do we do about raptors and owls?
They're animals.
Oh, they are. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it's freshwater aquatic species. What do we do with saltwater aquatic species?
That's why we're saying to go beyond aquatic.
No, but
So-
flora and fauna don't pick up whales.
Yes, they do. It's a very, we're talking about like the bottom of the taxonomy scale, where we're bringing, flora is all plants and fauna is all animals.
Okay, I guess I never thought of a whale as an animal. I always thought of it as a
It's a mammal. It's a mammal.
aquatic species.
Yeah.
So are freshwater aquatic species actually fauna?
Yes. Insects are fauna. Well, insects are kind of a funny one, actually. I better be careful there. I might get those.
Well, you can have those
Insects.
big crawling spiders. I don't want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You're
We
here.
got lots at our house. But yeah, all animals are covered under fauna and all plants are covered under flora, whether it's aquatic or marine, or freshwater or marine, sorry, or
And
terrestrial.
thus ends biology class.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Councillor Fast.
Well, then there's mushrooms. So I think
Right.
I'm going to stop, but I will say I remember somewhere in our land use bylaw it speaks of biota, and that was
Right.
feel free, whatever.
There you go. That covers everything.
Catch-all, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Moving along. This is good. We're doing good for time here, folks. Marine protection. So the draft policy statement makes strong efforts to improve marine protection throughout various policy objectives, found primarily in section 4.6. And specifically, BIM staff welcome the measures identified to support the protection of eelgrass meadows and recommend consideration of additional policies or language that promotes more sensitive mooring or anchoring practices. Additionally, BIM staff recommend that the draft policy takes into consideration what can be done with respect to mitigating impacts from microplastics. In BIM, staff have shared with Islands Trust staff some of the work that's been done around Mannion Bay in particular, and Bowen Island is being seen as a leader when it comes to sensitive mooring practices, and so Islands Trust staff welcome these comments, and we just recommend that they be included in the referral response. Okay, great. I'm going to jump ahead. That's it for the specific sections of the trust from staff. There's this recommendation, which is that the committee of the whole recommends to council to consider the staff report and this presentation, including the BIM staff recommendations when contemplating a formal response. We'll do the same as I recommended for Metro and Translink, where we'll bundle this into a concise, well, it might be long, but response for the regular council meeting. But I do know that some councillors may have additional comments and concerns. Before we go there, I did want to just jump ahead very quickly, because I do want to identify that we did take into consider the financial implications of these long-range plans. And starting with Metro in the middle, the Metro 2050 has little or no direct financial or resource impacts on BIM. We don't see or recognize that there'll be much change to BIM operations or much financial impact. Transport 2050 may have an actual financial impact, as seen through the development cost charge. And so we may see the development cost charges rise, which will impact development here on Bowen. I don't think that'll be an impact to any staffing resources or anything like that. But the Islands Trust work, the bulk of the policy may have little to no impact on BIM in terms of a financial impact, but there is expanded scope. And so I just wanted to be clear that we do recognize that that expanded scope may result in operational expenditure increases to the Islands Trust, which will translate to an increased tax requisition to BIM. It may also increase the scope of the work required for BIM staff. And so of the three, the Islands Trust policy statement has the greatest likelihood to have a financial impact on BIM as well as impact on our staffing and resources. I just wanted to make sure that that was clearly stated here. Councillor Fast.
Just so councillors know, I'm not saying anything against your recommendation or your information there. That's fine. That Islands Trust has also got on its list to ask the province to restore some of the funding that it has taken away over past years, leaving more of the tax burden with residents. And also just to let people know that with an updated policy statement, possibly we would be eligible for more grants from senior levels of government. For example, we've got one now around species at risk, and these are, it helps to have the public consultation. You've gone to the public recently, and this is what they want. So thanks everybody for your comments. I just wanted to mention, I put in the email, anybody can send in any comments at any time. So if you know Islanders who are interested, please invite them. There's the link. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
2 points. One is I wonder if we could include in our feedback just a very straightforward statement that we do not wish to see a resultant increased tax requisition to BIM. I mean, it may have no force whatsoever, but getting it on paper is important. The other thing is that on the Islands Trust website, where the various documents related to the policy statement are posted, at the very end, there's responses from others, from other governments, from it looks like there might be some citizens in there. There's one from Metro Vancouver, which is, from my perspective, quite startling in its brevity. And it amounts to rock on, thumbs up. There's like nothing in it. And I think that it would be useful for us as a municipality to send our feedback to Metro Vancouver Planning so that they realize that maybe they ought to have chatted with us, unless they did. Did anybody from, no, they just sent in a 1-page thumbs up. Yeah, they need to become aware that there are consequences, potential consequences for one of their municipalities, and they didn't do their due diligence on this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nicholson. And I want to circle back in particular to Councillor Hawking, because I know Councillor Hawking had some really good points that he wanted to raise. And so I wanted to open it to Councillor Hawking and go from there.
Thank you, Liam. So these are just items. As I worked through the Islands Trust document, I found a number of things that I found strange and concerned me. So, and I'll refer to the page number and the item number. So the first one is on page 22 of 37, and it is 4.3.7, and it's under forest stewardship policies. And so 4.3.7 says, local trust committees and island municipalities shall, in their official community plans and regulatory bylaws, retain large land holdings and parcel sizes to enable sustainable forest harvesting practices. So I can't imagine that we would be doing such a thing. I don't really know what that meant. It thought, well, this is bizarre. Surely this doesn't apply to us.
Councillor Morris.
I have been commenting for a number of years when we've been trying to suggest to the province that they not do any logging on Bowen on the Crown lands, that we have sections in our OCP that encourage logging on Crown lands. Quite happy to have them removed, but we've got them in there. But I agree with you that, you know, planning clear cutting and then having another statement like this is kind of contradictory.
That's not our land holding though, that's for sure.
Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a great comment, and it's particularly within the context of Bowen Island, we should make it. I think some of these are left over from 20 years ago, and some islands had forestry as one of the main parts of their economy, and I think things have changed, and certainly from Bowen's perspective, we might want to make David's comment. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Councillor.
Okay.
Back to you, Councillor Hawking.
Okay, so page 26 of 37. Page 26 of 37. Just scrolling down there on mine. 26 of 37. It is 4.6.7. And Liam, if you're rolling along and putting them up on the screen, yeah, 4.6.7. That finfish farms should not be permitted. Now, I've done it. It's, I guess, not very important for us, but I've done a lot of work on this. I did over the years, and finfish farms, open net cage finfish farms, certainly are problems. But the solutions that I worked on years ago was either to put them on land or put them in closed containment, and that could address these environmental issues. So it seemed to me that that was just a simpler way of dealing with this. Instead of saying they should not be permitted, they should required to be in closed containment or on land. This is the solution that my organization came up with years ago. It's not critical to us, but it's just something that struck me. I don't know if anyone has any other comments or thoughts.
Councillor Morris.
Oh, I was clearly wondering why we wouldn't allow them on land. I'm not sure about the closed containment, because is there possibilities of breakage and damage with that, which you wouldn't have with the land one?
The East Coast is Nova Scotia predominantly has moved entirely to land-based aquaculture.
Yeah.
And seems to work fine.
So I would support having land-based finfish farms, no problem.
Okay. I think Sue Ellen has a comment. Yeah.
Question, actually, and it relates to shellfish farms. I don't know whether the Bowen Council has thought about the possibility of having rafts of plastic rafts with nets and strings hanging down to grow mussels and things like that in our bays, but some islands have these, and Denman in particular, it's a huge problem because all the plastic washes up on the beach, and some beaches are full of pieces of rebar and things, netting stuck down so that birds don't eat the shellfish. Anyway, I just wonder if we might want to make a comment about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Liam.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't think our coastline lends itself to that. The exposure is pretty hard on that infrastructure. So,
Yeah, and I saw there's quite a lot of stuff on that in other places that I bumped into, but I don't see it right now, and I don't know where it is in the document.
Councillor Morris, you have your hand up?
Well, yeah, I thought it was somewhere else, but I guess the other thing is, I mean, if you're mussels, Salt Spring Island mussels are really good. If they're grown in the vertical dropping, you know, the things going down, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It's the what's happening in the sand between Hornby and Denman, I guess, or Denman and the mainland. You know, more the clam beds and things like that are artificial that I have a concern about. But I think that's covered there. It's got to be somewhere else.
Councillor Nicholson.
Could we just ask, or could we just provide the feedback that the rationale for 4.6.7 finfish is not clear, and maybe also bring up the point about other seafood. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Another aquaculture. Yep.
Yeah, but
Okay.
not get into the details.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hawking, back to you.
Page 32 of 37. and this is more important for us, 6.1.5. There it is, 6.15. It is Trust Council policy that recreation activity trails, active transportation networks in the trust area should be small scale. Now, I don't know what that means. And Liam mentioned early on about mentioning small scale, but does this mean that our path going across the island would not, it's certainly not small scale, it's pretty big scale for the island. So I don't know what that means, and I certainly don't want it to be there to prevent us from making our path across the island and in other areas. Small scale for active transportation, no. We need larger scale.
Councillor Kale.
David, thank you, by the way, for these points you're raising. I have been over this document 101 more times than enough, and I'm glad that it's getting a fresh pair of eyes looking at it. And small scale, rather like compact, is one of those issues that's going to need definition, because what is small scale? Small scale to Metro is not necessarily small scale to Denman. And you're absolutely right, and thank you, because that is the sort of thing that we to give this document credibility, that wording is just going to lead to too many questions. So anything else you spot like that, I for one am making careful notes. So I appreciate your comments.
Okay, Councillor Morris.
Well, another difficulty in interpreting is what does appropriately located mean?
Right. Okay, and Councillor Past.
Sorry, I was going to suggest striking small scale, because everything is island scale on an island, and appropriately located, sustainable, safeguard, protect, that all takes everything into account. I think, you know, what we've talked about on Bowen in the past is an island-wide network of trails. And that's what people have been working towards. That's what's in the parks plan. And is that small scale? I just don't see why the word small scale should be there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hawking, back to you.
Yeah, page 33 of 37, and this is a bit more complicated. 6.1.12. Okay, local trust committees, islands shall in their OCPs and reg bylaws establish appropriate density limits for efficient and sustainable use of a land base. Now, the density limits, I know this is something that's been in our OCP and it's considered very big, it's considered as very important. To me, I find density is a very crude scale and in many ways almost meaningless. And the example I would give is that if we look at, say, that property right by the lighthouse at Cape Roger Curtis and think of that's a 1 unit, and we compare that to our somewhere near 30 units, they're almost nearing completion in Snug Cove, the two of them would probably have pretty similar embodied energy and materials in terms of their environmental implications. One supports somewhere around 30 families, the other one supports 1 part-time family. They're both the same density. So I just find density is a very crude scale and almost meaningless. And the point of this, appropriate limits, is important to use the land base appropriately, but it's way more complicated than just slapping a number down of a unit. So I just have real trouble with this in our own OCP, but in this document as well. And that's a long, that requires a long discussion. It's not something that can be easily changed, but it's just something that has been a bee in my bonnet for a while.
Right, and to be clear, I believe this is a part of the existing policy statement. So
yeah,
this isn't new.
So I've got one final one, and that is on page 36 of 37, the second to last page, 6.3.10, and we talked about this already, and I didn't mention this to you earlier, Liam. 6.3.10, the one on there we go. Trust Council shall advocate to the provincial government agencies in support of the electrification of ferries in the trust area. Absolutely, but they say nothing whatsoever about foot passenger service. And foot passenger service is obviously important. We've been talking about it for Bowen. It's important for commuter runs. It would also be important, I think, for Salt Spring Island, the one that goes directly to Victoria from whatchamacallit,
Fulford?
from Fulford, yeah. Now, obviously, foot passenger service doesn't work for lots of things and lots of inter-island use, but for commuter runs with good transit, it's important. We talked about it a lot. I think it should be in the document too, please.
Hey, Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. Councillor Nicholson, Hawking, sorry, getting tired here. I've had this thought, and I've been communicating with a couple of other trustees about electric bicycles, and whether we want to use the word foot passenger or whether we might use the word alternative transportation ferries or something else. I don't know, because I can see that bicycles and electric bicycles are the appropriate scale for many islands and getting around. And if you, anyway, I just offer that as a thought. Otherwise, I'm in support. The idea of foot passenger kind of means foot passenger. Does it mean foot passenger only? Because you might want to think about bicycles. For example, I think we might get lots of people with bicycles coming to Bowen, particularly with our new multi-use, and same with Gabriola and some of the other islands. So I wonder, some of you who've traveled more in the world perhaps might have a better idea about this, but I'm just thinking about the new world to come. This is the 30-year plan. And are we excluding something that we might be sorry later? Otherwise, I like your idea. Thank you.
I think that's a good point, Sue Ellen. I think you could add something in here that support of the electrification of ferries and foot passenger service and other marine service that's supportive of bicycle use. Back when I was a regular commuter with a bike, we'd throw it on, and I was using the
Apodaca?
Yeah, the Apodaca. We throw the bikes on the back, as with other people. So yeah,
I think that's pretty standard, eh?
Yeah.
I think
Councillor
the C buses all have room for bikes, don't they?
Yes, people just walk them in.
Yeah.
Councillor Nicholson.
Nothing to add.
Okay.
I just want to also, I've raised this point, and I don't want to sound complaining. I generally think this is a good document. I think they've done a lot of work to improve the Islands Trust, in a sense, regional growth strategy, as we point out, their policy statement. There's a bunch of issues that I think staff, Liam, your staff have raised that are really good. But in general, I support the direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hawking. And Councillor Nicholson.
There were a lot of complaints early on when the first reading was being anticipated about lack of clarity around the language related to First Nations, people not being sure what a knowledge keeper was or Indigenous knowledge. Is all of that defined? It's not in the policy statement that I saw. It's not defined?
I don't think so. I think it's inferred. So I think I think there can be supporting documents that could help explain what that means, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be useful when it goes out again to the public, because sort of at the end of those paragraphs where you've got a little bit of First Nations content that's being inserted, it kind of jumps off the page repeatedly.
So we would add that to the list of the terms for definition.
Yeah, yeah. Also, just to make sure that we all know that we actually are all talking about the same thing, because it's new language in the policy, and yeah.
Okay. Councillor Kale.
Yes, please. Just to follow up on Councillor Nicholson, that glossary of terms, call it what you like. all these expressions clearly explained would be very helpful. And it wouldn't be a bad thing if you might, I believe CEO Hottenspiller at the Islands Trust must be dealing with the same issues. It wouldn't be unhelpful maybe if you would speak to him on this so we could get a common directory of terms, not one just that Bowen understands, but maybe one that everybody understands. So we could, I wonder if we could short circuit or hot wire it so we're all speaking from the same dictionary.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Councillor Morris.
Just a couple of things. In Councillor Hawkins 6.3.10, it talks about advocating to provincial government agencies. It's not to the provincial government or to BC Ferries. So
I think they're likely and this is likely referring to BC Ferries as a Crown Corp.
Yeah.
well, the language is wrong. They're not. They're not an agency. They're a Crown Corp.
Yeah, I think that's yeah.
And they're not a Crown Corp that the province technically can direct what they do. Otherwise, they're going to end up in a consolidated entity, and they don't want that. I was looking at 6.44. Unfortunately, the printed copy I've got, I printed off before all this new stuff was identified as new. Just scroll down a little bit, Liam. Okay, 6.44. Okay, it's not new. We haven't done that. Okay, I just wanted to check and see whether that was new or not. Now, the other point I had, which I think we should raise for clarity, when we're talking about these different sections, it's 6.44.2, and then what do you say, the second bullet, the third bullet? It would be nice if they labeled them A, B, C, and D, or a little I, two little I's, so you could actually, you know, refer to a specific section when you were talking about it.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other problem is, and I don't know if anybody else has it, but when I go on to the Islands Trust homepage with my iPad and I try and download the policy statement, all I get is the first page. Same with with any of the committees. If I go to download an agenda,
You're not sure about that.
So nobody else has had that problem?
Can I speak?
Councillor Fast?
Yeah, that is a problem for some people, and it's easy to hit that little up button and download it rather than, is that what you mean? Printing from?
No, I don't want to print it. I want to look at the whole document, and I can't, when I'm on my iPad and I'm on the screen that has the link.
I'm one of the people having these problems too. With the big overhaul of the website, there are still some outstanding problems. And so if you could just send a note to web comments at islandstrust.bc.
This will be my third note to Laurie Foster about this. I sent one today and I've sent one before about problems.
If you send it to web comments, then it goes into the actual people that are working on the web. So that's just my suggestion, and it gets onto a sheet and they work their way down. Thank you.
Okay, so recognizing that we are 6 minutes past time, I do want to thank everybody for their commitment of 3 hours, very well spent. I've got 6 pages of notes that I took, and I'm sure that we've got more. So as mentioned, we will endeavor to consolidate the comments and bring them back to the regular council meeting of November 22nd as a recommendation for council formal response to these referral requests. And so there'll be an opportunity for you to propose amendments to those as they come forward. I see a few hands up there. I think Sue Ellen, your hand. Oh, it's come down. Okay.
I was just going to say thanks everybody for your great input, and I hope I didn't make the meeting too long. Thank you.
Maureen?
I was just going to say thank you to staff for pulling all the preparatory material together. It made a quite complicated and challenging job a whole lot easier. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. And staff did also recognize to the Islands Trust staff when we met with them about the great efforts that they put in, because it's, while we might not agree with everything, it's definitely a big effort, and they have done some great work there. So we do want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and thank you, Liam, for your presentation today. That was awesome. It was some pretty dry stuff, but you got to serve. It's really nice. Well done to you and staff. I appreciate that. Any further business? And as there's no further business, I will call this meeting adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your